I see integration and Cuspin Forfin. I need to see edification and
Prulinoy State Bar, Wyvone Newman. Here is my identification.
Everybody's got something to show me. I need documented proof of citizenship right now.
I have documented proof.
I need documented proof of citizenship right now.
You boys are done.
Bar card doesn't establish.
I have just stated my legal status. I was born in this city.
The Whole Foods on North Halsted Street was busy when it happened. Tuesday morning, 11:20 a.m. The kind of Chicago autumn that cuts right through a jacket, with golden leaves skipping across the parking lot and the smell of cold air mixing with fresh coffee from the cafe inside. Yvonne Newman had pulled her car into the lot for a quick grocery run between client calls. Still in her work clothes, tailored gown, shining red, the kind of casual gown that means someone has a 2 p.m. meeting and intends to be ready for it. Her tote bag was on the passenger seat. Her phone had 3 unread messages from her paralegal. Her trunk was half-loaded with groceries. Just another Tuesday errand for a woman who hadn't taken a full day off in 6 weeks. Except that across the lot, almost invisible between 2 parked delivery trucks, an unmarked ICE vehicle had been sitting for 40 minutes with its engine idling. Agent Grizzle Pemberton and his team had been watching the lot the way they always watched. For someone who, in their estimation, didn't fit the picture, they had already decided was correct. Their body cameras were already rolling, capturing what would become the most expensive miscalculation in the history of the Chicago ICE field office, and the recording that would eventually put their own agent behind bars. If you believe that citizenship is not something a person should have to prove at a grocery store because of the color of their skin, subscribe right now and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because what Agent Pemberton said inside that SUV when he thought no one powerful was listening is the moment this entire $26.8 million story turns on. Yvonne Newman did not have a simple relationship with the word no. She had heard it her whole life, and she had spent her whole career making it irrelevant. She grew up on the south side of Chicago, the oldest of 3 children, in a house where the heat sometimes went out in January and the kitchen table was used for everything. Homework, arguments, Sunday dinners, and the long, quiet conversations her mother had with her about what a black girl was going to need to survive in a world that had already decided what to think of her before she opened her mouth. Her mother was a nurse. Her father drove a city bus for 23 years. They were not wealthy, but they were serious people, and they raised serious children. Yvonne was the most serious of all of them. She graduated from the University of Illinois on a merit scholarship, went straight to Northwestern University School of Law, and graduated in the top 5% of her class with a specialty in constitutional law and a reputation among her professors for a memory so precise and so complete that one of them had told her, during her second year, that she didn't just remember case law, she seemed to have absorbed it into her actual bones. She had been a defense attorney in Chicago for 20 years. In that time, she had tried 114 cases and won 89 of them. She had argued successfully before the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals 4 times. She had taken on 3 separate civil rights cases against law enforcement agencies, 2 of which had resulted in policy changes that were still in effect. And she had done all of it with the specific, quiet intensity of a woman who understood that the law was not abstract. It touched real people, in real moments, and what happened in those moments mattered more than anything written in a textbook. Her colleagues called her the Iron Trap, a nickname she had not asked for and did not discourage because it was accurate. Once Yvonne Newman had a fact, she did not let it go. Once she had a case, she did not stop building it until there was nothing left to build. She was 44 years old, and on this particular Tuesday morning, she had a 2 p.m. client call, a brief due on Thursday, and a grocery list that had been sitting in her tote bag for 4 days. She had 25 minutes between a morning meeting and a lunch call, and she decided that was enough time to stop at the Whole Foods on North Halsted, pick up the 6 things she actually needed, and be back at her desk before noon. She pulled into the parking lot at 11:14 a.m., found a space near the cart return, and started loading bags into her trunk. She did not notice the unmarked SUV idling at the far end of the lot. Grizzle Pemberton had been with ICE for 11 years, and in that time he had built a reputation that depended entirely on who was describing him. His supervisors described him as productive. His numbers were always high. In any given month, Pemberton's saturation team produced more detentions than almost any other field unit in the Chicago office, and in a division where performance was measured in volume, that made him valuable. He received commendations. He was promoted twice. He was, by the official record of the agency that employed him, one of their best. The people his team had stopped told a different story. Pemberton was 41, heavy through the shoulders, with the kind of stillness that wasn't calm but was something colder. The stillness of a man who was always assessing, always calculating, always looking for the angle that confirmed what he already believed. He had a way of speaking to people that started at the top of his authority and moved downward from there. He did not ask questions. He issued instructions. He did not consider possibilities. He operated on conclusions. His saturation team, 4 agents including himself, had a method that was not written in any official field guide, but was understood by everyone who worked with them. They targeted high-traffic commercial areas in mixed neighborhoods, grocery store parking lots, gas stations, strip malls. They looked for people who, in Pemberton's own words, created a discrepancy, a phrase he used often and never fully defined, because the definition was not something he could say out loud in a formal setting. What it meant, in practice, was Black and Latino drivers in expensive vehicles. People who, by Pemberton's internal accounting, did not match the car they were driving or the neighborhood they were driving through. He had never once written that down in a report, but the data from his 11 years of stops said it plainly for anyone willing to read it, which, until this week, no one in his chain of command had been. There was also the matter of the bonus structure. It was not official. It was not in writing anywhere that investigators had yet found. But within the saturation team, it was understood. The agent who hit the highest monthly detention number received what Pemberton called end-of-month recognition, extra overtime allocations, favorable scheduling, and in at least 3 documented cases, direct cash payments from a discretionary fund that his unit supervisor controlled. Pemberton had created the system himself and run it quietly for 4 years. On that Tuesday morning, he was running his usual loop through Lincoln Park when he spotted a black woman in a red gown loading groceries into a luxury car in the Whole Foods lot. He told his partner to pull around to the exit. He had no information about the woman. He had not run her plates. He did not know her name. He knew only what he thought he saw, and what he thought he saw was a number for his end-of-month total. He was about to find out how wrong a person can be. Yvonne heard the footsteps before she heard the voice. Two sets, moving fast across the parking lot asphalt, with the particular rhythm of people who were not approaching to ask for help. She closed the trunk and turned around. 2 men in tactical vests with ICE printed across the chest were crossing the lot toward her. A third was positioned near the lot exit in a way that was not accidental. Pemberton was in front, moving with the forward lean of a man who had done this many times and expected the same result he always got. Yvonne set her tote bag on the trunk and put both hands where they could be seen. "ICE," Pemberton said, stopping 3 feet from her. "I need to see identification and proof of legal status." "Good morning," Yvonne said. Her voice was the one she used in courtrooms. Not loud, not rushed, built for clarity. "My name is Yvonne Newman. I am a licensed defense attorney, Illinois State Bar, 20 years in practice. I was born at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, 4 miles from where we are standing." She reached into her tote slowly and produced her bar card. "This is my professional identification." Pemberton looked at it the way a person looks at something they have already decided not to accept. "I need documented proof of citizenship," he said. "Something official." A state bar card is an official document issued after a background check, fingerprinting, and character review by the Illinois Supreme Court, Yvonne said. "It is more thoroughly verified than most government IDs." She held it level and steady. "I also have my birth certificate available digitally. Would you like me to pull it up?" "A phone screen proves nothing." "Then call the Bar Association," Yvonne said, still completely calm. "The number is on the card. They will confirm my identity, my license number, and my current standing in under 3 minutes. Pemberton stepped slightly closer. You're being uncooperative. I am being precise, Yvonne said. There is a difference. You have approached me in a public parking lot without reasonable suspicion of any specific immigration violation. I am a United States citizen, born in this city, licensed to practice law in this state. I have presented credentials and offered verification. Under the Fourth Amendment, you do not have the authority to detain me further without cause. She held his gaze. I am asking you clearly and professionally to state your legal basis for this stop or to step aside. Pemberton looked at her for a long moment. She watched his face, calculating, reassessing, and then landing somewhere that was not logic but ego. She had watched that exact sequence happen in courtrooms when a witness realized they had been caught, but had decided to keep going anyway. He reached for the handcuffs. Hands behind your back, he said. You're coming with us. Agent Pemberton, Yvonne said very quietly, you are making a $26 million mistake. He didn't listen. He never did. What happened next was captured on 3 body cameras, 2 store security cameras, and the phones of 4 shoppers who had stopped walking when they heard the word ICE and had not put their phones down since. Pemberton took Yvonne by the arm and turned her toward her own vehicle. She did not fight. She did not pull away. She went with the controlled compliance of a woman who understood, with complete clarity, that the most powerful thing she could do in this moment was give them nothing they could use and take everything she could remember. As Pemberton pulled her hands behind her back, her tote bag slipped from the trunk. The bar card, which she had been holding in her right hand, hit the asphalt and skidded under the front wheel of the car parked next to hers. Pemberton's partner stepped over it without stopping. Neither of them reached down to pick it up. One of the shoppers recording from the cart return zoomed in on the card on the ground. The Illinois State Bar seal was clearly visible. This is a licensed attorney, a man's voice said from somewhere behind the camera. They just arrested a licensed attorney. Pemberton guided Yvonne toward the unmarked SUV. She walked with her back straight and her chin level, the way she walked into every courtroom, like the room belonged to her, and she was simply allowing others to be in it. A woman near the store entrance had her hand pressed over her mouth. A teenager had turned his phone horizontal to get a wider shot. Before the SUV door closed, Yvonne did something that Pemberton did not notice and would not think about until it was far too late. She turned the small digital recorder in her jacket pocket, the one she carried every day, the one she used to capture notes between meetings, to the on position. It fit in her palm. It made no sound. It had a battery life of 14 hours. The door closed. The SUV pulled out of the lot. Inside that vehicle, for the next 31 minutes, Agent Grizzle Pemberton and his partner believed they were alone with someone who had no power and no recourse. They behaved accordingly. They talked freely. About the month's numbers. About the bonus they were expecting. About the supervisor who had quietly approved the payment structure. About the neighborhoods that were most productive. About the kinds of people who never pushed back, and the rare ones who did, and how to handle them. They said all of it out loud, in a moving vehicle, 14 inches from a woman with a recorder in her pocket and 20 years of courtroom experience in her head. By the time the SUV reached the processing facility, Yvonne Newman had everything she needed. The ride took 31 minutes, and Yvonne spent every second of it doing what she had always done best. Listening. She sat behind Pemberton in the second row, hands cuffed in front of her. A small procedural error on his part that she noted and filed away, and she kept her face neutral, and her breathing steady, and her recorder running. Pemberton and his partner, Agent Dale Crouch, sat in the front 2 seats and spoke to each other the way people speak when they are certain no one worth worrying about can hear them. It started with numbers. Crouch said they were at 31 for the month, and that 35 was the threshold for the top tier of the bonus. Pemberton said they had 4 days left, and that the Lincoln Park lot had been good to them before, and would be good again. Crouch laughed. He said something about the lot being well stocked on Tuesdays. Pemberton agreed. Then Pemberton said something that would eventually be read aloud in a federal courtroom to a jury of 12 people who sat very still as they heard it. He said that the best arrests were the ones where the person was too scared or too smart to make noise, because the ones who made noise cost time. He said that his team had learned over the years to read a situation fast, to figure out who was going to fight and who was going to fold. He said today's had seemed like a folder, but had turned out to be a problem. Crouch asked what kind of problem. Pemberton said he wasn't sure yet. Said she had a card of some kind, but that it looked printed. Said it didn't matter, because by the time anyone sorted it out, the month would be over. Crouch said that was fine. Said that the bonus cleared on the first of the month, regardless of what happened to the cases after. Pemberton said that was the beauty of the system. Yvonne listened to all of it with her eyes slightly downcast and her expression blank. Inside, she was doing what she always did in depositions. When a witness said something that cracked the whole case open, she was staying absolutely still so they would keep going. They kept going for 22 more minutes. By the time the SUV pulled into the processing facility lot, the recorder in Yvonne's pocket held 31 minutes of audio that included the names of the supervisor who ran the payment fund, the name of the account it cleared through, the approximate dollar amounts for the top 3 monthly earners, and enough incriminating language to build a federal criminal case without needing a single additional witness. Yvonne Newman had walked into a parking lot to buy groceries. She was leaving with the evidence that would dismantle an entire unit of federal law enforcement. She kept her face neutral as they walked her through the facility door. She was already writing the brief in her head. The Chicago ICE Regional Field Office was not a building that was used to bad days, and the director of that office, a career federal administrator named Marcus Leary, had specifically arranged his professional life to keep it that way. He was in a Saturday morning budget meeting when his assistant knocked on the conference room door at 12:47 p.m. and handed him a folded note. He read it. He read it again. Then he excused himself from the meeting in a way that made every person in the room turn and watch him leave. The note contained 4 pieces of information: the name of the person Pemberton's team had detained, her title, her bar number, and the name of the federal judge she had clerked for 20 years ago, who was still on the bench and who had already been called. Leary reached Pemberton by phone in under 90 seconds. The conversation was short and moved in one direction. Leary's. He used the word immediately 4 times. He used the word catastrophic twice. He did not raise his voice because he was a man who had learned that volume was less efficient than precision, and right now, precision was the only tool that had any chance of containing what Pemberton had put in motion. It could not be contained. Yvonne had been in the processing facility for 47 minutes when Leary arrived in person. She had been placed in a holding room, not a cell. The duty officer had been careful about that once the initial check had confirmed her identity, and she had been given water and a phone. She had used the phone to call 2 people. The first was her paralegal, who she told to pull the file on ICE field operations in the Northern Illinois district. The second was her personal attorney, a federal litigator named Conrad James, who had been her law school study partner and who answered the phone on the first ring because he had already seen the news. The footage from the Whole Foods parking lot had been posted online at 12:03 p.m. By 1:30, it had been viewed by over 3 million people. By 2, it was on the homepage of every major Chicago news outlet. By 3, 2 national networks had picked it up. Leary walked into the holding room and introduced himself with the careful formality of a man who understood that every word he said was going to end up in a legal document. He apologized. He said the matter was being reviewed at the highest level of the office. Yvonne looked at him with the same steady expression she used when opposing counsel said something in court that she already had the answer to. "Director Leary," she said, "I appreciate the apology, but I want you to understand something, clearly." She folded her hands on the table. "I am not here to negotiate. I am here to inform you that what happened today is the beginning of a case, not the end of one. And the case is going to be very, very thorough." Leary did not respond. He didn't have anything to say that would help. The government's lawyers called Conrad James on a Wednesday morning, 11 days after the arrest, with a settlement offer. It was substantial, more than most people would have taken without a second thought. It came with a confidentiality clause, a statement from the agency that used the phrase procedural inconsistency instead of the word misconduct, and a promise of an internal review that would remain internal. Conrad called Yvonne and read her the terms. She listened all the way to the end without interrupting, which was how she always listened to things she had already decided about. Then she said, "No." Conrad had expected this. "They'll go higher," he said. "I know," Yvonne said. "Tell them no anyway." What the government's lawyers did not know, what Pemberton and Crouch and their supervisor did not know, was that Yvonne had spent the 11 days since her release doing what she always did after a major arrest, building the case from the ground up, brick by brick, with the patience and precision of a woman who'd been doing exactly this for 20 years. She had filed a federal injunction against the saturation team's continued operations within 48 hours of her release, citing the 4th and 14th Amendments, and attaching a preliminary evidence summary that was 43 pages long. The injunction was granted by a federal judge on day 3. The team was suspended from field operations pending review. She had submitted the audio recording to the U.S. Attorney's Office on day 4, along with a written transcript she had prepared herself from memory during the processing facility hold and confirmed against the recording that evening. The U.S. Attorney's Office had opened a criminal investigation by day 6. She had contacted the ACLU, 2 civil rights organizations, and a legal journalist she had known for 12 years. She had done this not to create noise, but to create a record. A public, permanent, documented record that could not be quietly resolved, with a confidentiality clause and an internal review. She also reached out, through Conrad, to the families of 17 other people who had been detained by Pemberton's team in the previous 18 months. Of those 17, 14 agreed to speak with her. Their stories were different in detail and identical in structure. Stopped without cause, credentials dismissed, processed, and released without charges, left to absorb the experience in silence, because they had believed that silence was their only option. Yvonne told each of them the same thing. She told them that they had a case. She told them that their experience was documented in the same records that would be used at trial. She told them that they had not been alone then, and they were not alone now, and that she intended to make sure the jury understood every single one of their names. The government's lawyers called back with a higher number 2 weeks later. Yvonne said no again. She wanted a trial. She wanted everything on the record. She wanted 12 citizens in a jury box to hear the recording from that SUV out loud in full, with no edits. She was going to give them exactly that. The federal trial of Grisel Pemberton opened on a Monday in September, and the courtroom was full from the first hour of the first day. Pemberton faced 4 counts: deprivation of rights under color of law, unlawful detention, conspiracy to commit civil rights violations, stemming from the documented bonus structure, and falsifying federal detention records, because the report he had filed described Yvonne as an uncooperative subject with unverifiable documentation, a characterization that the parking lot security footage, the body camera recordings, and the testimony of 4 eyewitnesses dismantled point by point. The defense argued that Pemberton had acted within the scope of his authority, that the stop had been based on reasonable field judgment, and that the audio recording, their most difficult problem, had been taken without consent and should be excluded from evidence. That last argument had been litigated before trial, and had lost because Yvonne's attorney had been very thorough in establishing that a person being transported against their will has no obligation to announce their recording device to their captors. The jury heard the recording on the morning of the 3rd day. The courtroom was silent for the full 31 minutes, not the polite silence of people being attentive. The specific, heavy silence of people hearing something that confirmed what they had suspected about how the world worked and had never expected to hear, confirmed so plainly. When it ended, the prosecuting attorney let the silence sit for a full 10 seconds before she said anything. Then she called her next witness. Yvonne Newman took the stand in a navy suit with a single gold pin on the lapel, a small scales of justice charm her mother had given her when she passed the bar. She took the oath with the gravity of someone who had administered it many times, and meant it every time she heard it. And then she did something she had been building toward for 20 years of professional stoicism and careful emotional control. She told the truth, not just the legal truth, not just the factual sequence of events, but the human truth. What it felt like to be slammed against her own car. What it felt like to hear her bar card hit the asphalt. What it felt like to sit in that SUV cuffed, listening to two men discuss her detention as a line item in their bonus calculation. What it felt like to think about the 17 other people who had sat in that same seat and had not had a recorder in their pocket or 20 years of legal training in their head. She did not cry, but she did not hide either. And the jury watched her with the full, quiet attention of 12 people who understood they were hearing something important. The cross-examination lasted 38 minutes and did not land a single meaningful blow. The jury deliberated for 14 hours over 3 days. They returned their verdict on a Thursday afternoon, guilty on all 4 counts. The jury's verdict was the beginning of the end, and the end came quickly and completely. Griswold Pemberton was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison on a Tuesday morning, in a courtroom that was as full on sentencing day as it had been on the first day of trial. The judge cited the deliberate and sustained nature of the conduct, the bonus structure that had turned civil rights violations into a revenue stream, the falsified records, and the 17 documented additional victims whose cases had been submitted to the court as supporting evidence. She said that the sentence was proportionate to a pattern of behavior that had operated with institutional tolerance for 4 years, and that the sentence was also a message to every agency that had a Pemberton and had chosen not to look. Pemberton had no statement. He was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, the same model, one journalist noted, as the ones he had used in the Whole Foods parking lot. The civil verdict came 6 weeks later. The jury deliberated for 9 hours and returned a figure of $26.8 million, the largest civil rights verdict in the history of the Northern District of Illinois. The number reflected the harm done to Yvonne, the harm done to the 17 additional plaintiffs whose cases had been consolidated into the civil action, and what the jury's written explanation called the calculated, profit-driven nature of a system designed to bypass the Constitution for financial gain. Yvonne did not celebrate publicly. She issued a statement through Conrad James that was 4 sentences long and contained no self-congratulation. It thanked the other plaintiffs. It thanked the jury. It named the Constitution once. It ended with a single sentence that several newspapers quoted in full. This verdict belongs to everyone who sat in that SUV and had no one to fight for them, until now. The saturation team was permanently disbanded the week of the verdict. The supervisor who had administered the bonus fund resigned before charges were filed and reached a separate plea agreement. The Chicago Ice Field office underwent a mandatory operational audit that ran for 7 months and produced a reform framework that was subsequently adopted by 3 other regional offices. The reform framework was formally named the Newman Standards in the final version of the document, a designation Yvonne had not requested and accepted without comment. She was back at her desk the morning after the verdict. She had a client meeting at 9 and a brief due at noon, and the 6 things she had never finished buying at the Whole Foods on North Halsted were still on a list in her tote bag, waiting. She would get to them on Tuesday. Between calls,